I've been blind since I was 14 when a drunk driver crashed into our car and glass went everywhere, including my eyes. And even though it's been years since that day, I still remember the last things I ever saw were the headlights coming toward us, and my mom's face turning toward me in slow motion, before everything went dark forever. So when my best friend Brad from middle school invited me to his wedding, I was actually excited to go because he's one of the only people who never treated me differently after the accident, never spoke to me in that overly loud or slow way some people do, never grabbed my arm without asking, and never made me feel like I was a burden or something broken that needed to be fixed. He even made sure I got an aisle seat where my guide dog Maple could lay down without being in anyone's way, which was such a thoughtful gesture because I know how complicated wedding seating charts can be, and he specifically remembered to accommodate me without making a big deal out of it. Everything was going great, until I realized his mom Evelyn was sitting right behind me, and I knew it was her because my friend had pointed her out earlier when we were finding our seats. The smell of her perfume was so strong it gave me an instant headache, one of those sharp, stabbing pains right behind my eyes that happens when scents are too overwhelming, and I've always been sensitive to smells since losing my sight because all my other senses got sharper to compensate. During the ceremony, I did what I always do and turned my face toward whoever was talking because that's just being polite when you can't see, and it helps me focus on the voices and feel more connected to what's happening around me, instead of just sitting there staring straight ahead like some kind of statue. "She's looking right at them," Evelyn whispered to someone next to her, but it wasn't really a whisper because I could hear every word clearly. She can obviously see everything. My friend squeezed my hand because she heard it too, and I could feel her tense up beside me, probably shooting Evelyn a look that I couldn't see but could definitely imagine. "That girl is probably just here to get attention with that fake dog," Evelyn kept going, loud enough for half the church to hear, and I felt my face get hot with embarrassment and anger, because Maple isn't just a dog. She's my independence, my safety, my constant companion who helps me navigate a world that wasn't built for people like me. I tried to ignore her and focus on Brad's vows, listening to the emotion in his voice as he promised to love and cherish his bride, but I could feel her staring at the back of my head the entire time, like lasers boring into my skull, and it made my skin crawl in a way that I couldn't quite explain. At the reception, Maple walked me to our table near the wedding party, her harness firm in my hand as she guided me around chairs and people, and I was so grateful for her steady presence because navigating crowded spaces is always challenging. Evelyn walked by and stopped right next to our table. I could tell by the click of her heels on the floor, and that overwhelming perfume smell getting stronger. "That dog shouldn't be near the food because it's filthy," she announced, and I felt everyone at our table shift uncomfortably in their seats. I ignored her because I didn't want to start anything at Brad's wedding. This was his special day, and the last thing I wanted was to cause a scene or take attention away from him and his beautiful bride. My friend whispered, "She's still staring at you," while Evelyn circled our table like some kind of predator sizing up its prey, and I could hear her footsteps moving around us slowly, deliberately. She dropped her napkin next to me, then gasped when I didn't pick it up, this exaggerated sound of shock that was clearly performed for everyone watching. "How rude," she announced to everyone within earshot. She saw me drop it. Then she started moving stuff around the table deliberately, making noise with each item to see if I would react, and I could hear the salt shaker scraping across the tablecloth, then my drink being shifted, then the centerpiece being repositioned. "Mom, what are you doing?" Brad called out from across the room, and I could hear the confusion and concern in his voice even from a distance. "Just making sure everyone's comfortable," she said in this fake sweet voice that dripped with passive aggression, the kind of tone that makes your stomach turn because you know there's venom underneath the sugar. During dinner, she stood behind me. I could feel her presence there like a dark cloud hanging over my chair, and smell her perfume mixing with the scent of the catered food. "That dog smells like a wet dumpster," she said loudly enough for our entire section to hear, and I felt my hands clench in my lap, because Maple is meticulously groomed and doesn't smell like anything except maybe the lavender shampoo I use on her. "Why would anyone bring a dirty animal to a wedding?" she continued, and I could hear other guests shifting uncomfortably, probably not knowing whether to intervene or pretend they didn't hear anything. Brad's grandmother asked about my dog in a kind, genuinely curious voice that was such a relief after Evelyn's hostility. "Can I pet her?" she asked sweetly, and I could hear the warmth in her tone. "I'm sorry, but you can't pet service dogs when they're working," I explained gently, because I never want to be rude to people who ask politely, even though I have to say no dozens of times at events like this. Evelyn laughed, this sharp, mocking sound that cut through the reception hall. "Working dogs are for people who actually need them, not for girls who want attention," she spat out, and I felt my face burning again with humiliation and rage. She leaned close and I smelled wine on her breath, sour and strong, mixing with that overwhelming perfume. "I know what you're doing and it's pathetic," she hissed right near my ear, and I felt myself shrinking in my chair, wishing I could disappear. During the father-daughter dance, when the music was playing and people were getting emotional watching Brad dance with his bride's father, Evelyn dropped a glass right behind me, the sound of shattering crystal exploding in my ears. When I jumped away from the sound instinctively because I couldn't see where the broken glass was and needed to protect both myself and Maple from getting cut, she said triumphantly, "It's interesting how you knew where that was. Like she'd just uncovered some great conspiracy." People were whispering and staring. I could feel their eyes on me and hear the low murmur of confused and uncomfortable conversations rippling through the crowd. "You're making everyone uncomfortable," Brad's cousin said to Evelyn, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," Evelyn shot back defensively, and I could hear the self-righteousness in her voice, like she genuinely believed she was doing something noble. Brad came over quickly, his footsteps urgent and heavy. "Mom, stop this right now," he said in a voice I'd never heard him use before, low and dangerous and absolutely furious. "Why?" "She is clearly faking," she said, pointing at me, and even though I couldn't see the gesture, I could feel her finger jabbing in my direction accusingly. "She's playing you idiots, and I'll prove it," she declared with the confidence of someone who has completely convinced themselves they're right. Evelyn waited until the best man's speech to make her final attack, choosing the moment when everyone was quiet and paying attention to maximize the drama and humiliation. Brad's brother was at the microphone telling a story about growing up with Brad, his voice warm and nostalgic, when Evelyn marched over to me, her heels clicking rapidly across the floor. "This girl is faking being blind for attention," she announced to the whole room, her voice rising above the best man's speech and cutting through the happy atmosphere like a knife. The room went silent and microphone feedback screeched painfully loud, making me wince. She grabbed my sunglasses off my face roughly, her fingers harsh against my skin, and started shining her phone flashlight right in my eyes, the brightness painful even through my damaged corneas. "See how she's squinting? That means she can see," she shouted triumphantly, as if squinting at a bright light aimed directly at your face was somehow proof of sight, rather than just a natural human reaction. People were gasping all around us, shocked sounds filling the silence. Evelyn grabbed Maple's harness and tried to yank her away from me roughly, and I felt panic surge through my chest because Maple is my lifeline, my connection to independence and safety. "This dog is being used as a prop for her sick game," Evelyn snarled, pulling harder on Maple's harness while my sweet dog tried to stay calm and focused despite being manhandled. That's when Brad's voice boomed across the reception hall, louder and angrier than I'd ever heard him. "Get your hands off her service dog right now." Evelyn spun around to face her son. I could hear her shoes scraping on the floor as she turned. "I'm just trying to protect you from this liar," she shrieked, her voice going high and hysterical. The entire room was staring as Brad walked toward us, his footsteps fast and heavy with rage, and I could feel the tension crackling in the air like electricity. "Mom, she's been blind since she was 14 years old. I was there the day she came back to school after the accident with bandages on her eyes. I can't believe you just assaulted one of my closest friends at my wedding." Brad's voice was shaking with fury and disbelief, and I could hear genuine pain underneath the anger. Evelyn's face must have gone white because I heard several people gasp at her expression. "I didn't know you actually knew her that well," she stammered weakly, her confident tone from earlier completely gone. Brad was shaking with rage. I could hear it in his voice and feel it in the air around him. "Maybe if you'd listened to literally anyone instead of harassing a blind woman, you would have known," he shouted, and the room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Brad looked at his mom with what I imagined was complete disgust in his eyes. "You need to leave right now," he said with cold finality. The bride stood by his side. I could hear her dress rustling as she moved next to her new husband in a show of solidarity. "We'll mail you some photos if we decide you deserve them," she added icily, and I wanted to hug her for backing me up. Evelyn tried explaining through tears that she thought I was a wedding crasher, some stranger who had snuck in with a fake service dog, her words tumbling over each other desperately. "Even if she was, that's assault," Brad told her firmly, his voice hard and unforgiving, and I heard Evelyn let out a choked sob. The wedding coordinator showed up with Evelyn's coat and walked her out while everyone watched in stunned silence, the only sounds being Evelyn's heels clicking away and her muffled crying. Brad came over to hug me gently and said, "I'm so sorry about my mother. That was absolutely insane," his voice full of genuine remorse and horror at what had just happened. The bride brought me a slice of cake. Update. The reception hall feels different now. Like the air itself has changed after what just happened, and I'm sitting here with a slice of wedding cake in front of me that the bride personally brought over, which is such a kind gesture, but I can barely think about eating because my hands are still shaking from the adrenaline. The fork feels heavy in my fingers, and I set it down on the plate, hearing the small clink of metal against china that seems too loud in my ears. My friend leans over and whispers that half the guests are staring at our table with sympathetic expressions, while the other half are pretending nothing happened, and I can feel the weight of all those eyes even though I can't see them. The sensation makes my skin prickle with discomfort, like being under a microscope, and I wish I could just disappear into the floor. Brad is still standing nearby. I can hear him talking to his brother in low, angry tones about what their mother just did, and the sound of his voice carries that edge of fury that hasn't quite settled yet. Someone at the next table shifts their chair, and the scraping sound makes me flinch, my nerves still raw from the confrontation. Maple presses closer against my leg, sensing my distress the way she always does, and I reach down to touch her soft fur for comfort. The wedding coordinator approaches our table with quick, purposeful steps that I can hear clicking across the floor, and she stops beside my chair. Her voice is gentle and professional when she quietly asks if I need anything, and she explains that Evelyn has been escorted completely off the property and won't be returning. She apologizes on behalf of the venue for what happened, even though it wasn't their fault. and the sincerity in her tone helps ease some of the tightness in my chest. She offers to move us to a different table if the current location feels uncomfortable after the confrontation, and I can hear the genuine concern in her suggestion. I tell her we're okay where we are, mostly because I don't want to draw more attention by relocating, and the last thing I need is everyone watching me move across the room. She squeezes my shoulder kindly before walking away, and that small gesture of support makes my throat tight with emotion. Brad's grandmother makes her way over to our table, moving slowly with what sounds like a cane tapping against the floor in a steady rhythm, and she sits down in the empty chair next to me without asking permission. The chair creaks slightly under her weight, and I hear her settle in with a soft exhale. She tells me she's appalled by her daughter-in-law's behavior, and wants me to know that Evelyn doesn't speak for the family, her voice shaky with emotion, and what might be tears. The tremor in her words feels genuine, not performative, and I find myself relaxing slightly in her presence. She asks about Maple properly this time, listening intently as I explain how guide dogs are trained and what Maple does for me, and her questions show real curiosity rather than judgment. She asks about the training process, how long it took, what commands Maple knows, and her genuine interest helps me feel less like a spectacle and more like a person again. We talk for several minutes, and she tells me about a neighbor who had a service dog years ago, making connections that feel natural rather than forced. The best man, Brad's brother, restarts his speech after the disruption, and I hear him clear his throat at the microphone. He makes a pointed comment about how the best weddings are the ones where you find out who really has your back, and the whole room erupts in supportive applause that I know is partly directed at me. The clapping is loud and sustained, lasting longer than typical applause, and I feel my face flush with a mix of embarrassment and gratitude. He tells a funny story about Brad standing up to bullies in high school, drawing a clear parallel to what just happened without explicitly naming it, and I feel my chest tighten with gratitude for how this family is trying to reclaim the celebration. His voice carries warmth and conviction as he talks about loyalty and friendship, and people laugh at the right moments, the tension in the room easing slightly. The speech ends with a toast to Brad and his bride, and to surrounding yourself with people who see you for who you really are, and glasses clink all around the room in agreement. During the toasts, several other guests come by our table to apologize for not intervening sooner, their voices full of regret and discomfort. A man introduces himself as Brad's uncle and tells me he should have spoken up, his voice gruff with shame. A woman touches my arm gently and says she's sorry for freezing, and while I appreciate the sentiment, part of me wonders why it took so long for people to speak up when the harassment was so obvious. One woman explains she thought it was a private family matter and didn't want to overstep, which I understand but also frustrates me because ableist harassment shouldn't require a relationship to warrant intervention. My friend squeezes my hand again and whispers that people are complicated and often freeze when they should act, which is true but doesn't make it easier to accept. The apologies keep coming, a steady stream of guilty voices, and I find myself reassuring people that it's okay, even though I'm not sure it really is. Brad finally comes back to sit with us, pulling up a chair that scrapes loudly against the floor and apologizing again, his voice still tight with anger, but also thick with emotion. He tells me he had no idea his mother was capable of something like that, and I can hear the genuine shock in his words. He explains that Evelyn has always been judgmental and status conscious, but he never imagined she'd physically assault someone, especially at his wedding, and I can hear the genuine shock and betrayal in his voice. I tell him it's not his fault and he shouldn't let this ruin his special day, but he shakes his head and I hear the movement. The bride joins us at the table, sitting down next to Brad, and she takes both our hands in hers, creating this little circle of solidarity that makes my throat tight with emotion. Her hands are warm and soft, and she holds on firmly like she's trying to anchor me. She tells me she's horrified by what happened and wants me to know I'm welcome in their family, that what Evelyn did doesn't represent who they are as a couple or what they value. She mentions they've already decided Evelyn won't be invited to any future family events until she makes a genuine apology and gets some education about disability and service animals, which feels like real accountability rather than empty words. As the reception continues around us, I start to feel the delayed emotional impact of what happened, my body finally processing the fear and humiliation now that the immediate threat is gone. My hands won't stop trembling, and I keep replaying Evelyn's voice in my head, that mocking tone and the feeling of her grabbing my sunglasses. The memory of her fingers on my face makes me feel sick, and I can still feel the phantom sensation of the phone light in my eyes. Maple senses my distress and pushes her head against my leg, in that way she does when I need grounding, and I bury my fingers in her fur. My friend notices me struggling and suggests we step outside for some air, and I nod gratefully because the reception hall suddenly feels too small and too full of people who witnessed my humiliation. We stand up carefully and Maple guides me through the tables, her movements smooth and practiced as she navigates the crowded space. Outside in the cool evening air, I can breathe more easily, and my friend describes the scene for me, telling me about the sunset colors and the garden area where we're standing. She says the sky is pink and orange, that there are roses along a stone path, that fairy lights are strung between trees. Her voice is deliberately calm and descriptive, painting the picture I can't see, and the familiar routine of her descriptions helps steady my breathing. She asks if I want to leave entirely, or just take a break, and I realize I don't want Evelyn's actions to drive me away from Brad's celebration. Leaving would feel like letting her win somehow, like admitting she was right to question my presence here. We stand there for maybe 15 minutes while I collect myself, and Maple sits pressed against my legs, her steady presence reminding me that I'm safe now and the danger has passed. The cool air helps clear my head, and the sounds of the reception drift out through the open doors, music and laughter that seems lighter now. When we return to the reception, the energy has shifted to something more genuinely celebratory, like people have collectively decided to move past the ugliness and focus on the actual reason we're all here. The DJ is playing upbeat music, and I can hear people laughing and dancing, the sounds of a party that's found its rhythm again. Brad spots us coming back in and immediately comes over to ask if I'm okay, his footsteps quick across the floor. I tell him honestly that I'm shaken, but don't want to miss his wedding, and he hugs me carefully, thanking me for staying. The fork feels heavy in my fingers, and I set it down on the plate, hearing the small clink of metal against china that seems too loud in my ears. My friend leans over and whispers that half the guests are staring at our table with sympathetic expressions, while the other half are pretending nothing happened, and I can feel the weight of all those eyes even though I can't see them. The sensation makes my skin prickle with discomfort, like being under a microscope, and I wish I could just disappear into the floor. Brad is still standing nearby. I can hear him talking to his brother in low, angry tones about what their mother just did, and the sound of his voice carries that edge of fury that hasn't quite settled yet. Someone at the next table shifts their chair, and the scraping sound makes me flinch, my nerves still raw from the confrontation. Maple presses closer against my leg, sensing my distress the way she always does, and I reach down to touch her soft fur for comfort. The wedding coordinator approaches our table with quick, purposeful steps that I can hear clicking across the floor, and she stops beside my chair. Her voice is gentle and professional when she quietly asks if I need anything, and she explains that Evelyn has been escorted completely off the property and won't be returning. She apologizes on behalf of the venue for what happened, even though it wasn't their fault, and the sincerity in her tone helps ease some of the tightness in my chest. She offers to move us to a different table if the current location feels uncomfortable after the confrontation, and I can hear the genuine concern in her suggestion. I tell her we're okay where we are, mostly because I don't want to draw more attention by relocating, and the last thing I need is everyone watching me move across the room. She squeezes my shoulder kindly before walking away, and that small gesture of support makes my throat tight with emotion. Brad's grandmother makes her way over to our table, moving slowly with what sounds like a cane tapping against the floor in a steady rhythm, and she sits down in the empty chair next to me without asking permission. The chair creaks slightly under her weight, and I hear her settle in with a soft exhale. She tells me she's appalled by her daughter-in-law's behavior, and wants me to know that Evelyn doesn't speak for the family, her voice shaky with emotion and what might be tears. The tremor in her words feels genuine, not performative, and I find myself relaxing slightly in her presence. She asks about Maple properly this time, listening intently as I explain how guide dogs are trained and what Maple does for me, and her questions show real curiosity rather than judgment. She asks about the training process, how long it took, what commands Maple knows, and her genuine interest helps me feel less like a spectacle and more like a person again. We talk for several minutes, and she tells me about a neighbor who had a service dog years ago, making connections that feel natural rather than forced. The best man, Brad's brother, restarts his speech after the disruption, and I hear him clear his throat at the microphone. He makes a pointed comment about how the best weddings are the ones where you find out who really has your back, and the whole room erupts in supportive applause that I know is partly directed at me. The clapping is loud and sustained, lasting longer than typical applause, and I feel my face flush with a mix of embarrassment and gratitude. He tells a funny story about Brad standing up to bullies in high school, drawing a clear parallel to what just happened without explicitly naming it, and I feel my chest tighten with gratitude for how this family is trying to reclaim the celebration. His voice carries warmth and conviction as he talks about loyalty and friendship, and people laugh at the right moments, the tension in the room easing slightly. The speech ends with a toast to Brad and his bride, and to surrounding yourself with people who see you for who you really are, and glasses clink all around the room in agreement. During the toasts, several other guests come by our table to apologize for not intervening sooner, their voices full of regret and discomfort. A man introduces himself as Brad's uncle and tells me he should have spoken up, his voice gruff with shame. A woman touches my arm gently and says she's sorry for freezing, and while I appreciate the sentiment, part of me wonders why it took so long for people to speak up when the harassment was so obvious. One woman explains she thought it was a private family matter and didn't want to overstep, which I understand but also frustrates me because ableist harassment shouldn't require a relationship to warrant intervention. My friend squeezes my hand again and whispers that people are complicated and often freeze when they should act, which is true but doesn't make it easier to accept. The apologies keep coming, a steady stream of guilty voices, and I find myself reassuring people that it's okay, even though I'm not sure it really is. Brad finally comes back to sit with us, pulling up a chair that scrapes loudly against the floor and apologizing again, his voice still tight with anger but also thick with emotion. He tells me he had no idea his mother was capable of something like that, and I can hear the genuine shock in his words. He explains that Evelyn has always been judgmental and status conscious, but he never imagined she'd physically assault someone, especially at his wedding, and I can hear the genuine shock and betrayal in his voice. I tell him it's not his fault and he shouldn't let this ruin his special day, but he shakes his head and I hear the movement. The bride joins us at the table, sitting down next to Brad, and she takes both our hands in hers, creating this little circle of solidarity that makes my throat tight with emotion. Her hands are warm and soft, and she holds on firmly like she's trying to anchor me. She tells me she's horrified by what happened and wants me to know I'm welcome in their family, that what Evelyn did doesn't represent who they are as a couple or what they value. She mentions they've already decided Evelyn won't be invited to any future family events until she makes a genuine apology and gets some education about disability and service animals, which feels like real accountability rather than empty words. A woman approaches our table and I hear her footsteps slow as she gets closer, hesitant but determined. She introduces herself and tells me she's Brad's cousin, the one who spoke up to Evelyn earlier during the confrontation, and her voice sounds familiar now that I'm paying attention. She sits down at our table without being invited, but it doesn't feel intrusive, more like she's claiming her right to be part of this conversation. She explains she's a special education teacher who works with blind students, and that's why she couldn't stay quiet when Evelyn was harassing me, her voice carrying a mix of professional authority and personal anger. She tells me she's seen this kind of thing before, people assuming disabled folks are faking or exaggerating their conditions, and it always makes her blood boil. We start talking about service dog rules and the constant questions blind people get, the never-ending need to explain and educate strangers who think they have a right to know everything. She shares stories from her classroom about kids with various disabilities facing similar suspicion, and I feel this wave of validation wash over me, talking to someone who really gets it. The conversation flows easily and naturally, covering the daily reality of navigating a world that treats disability with doubt instead of acceptance. She tells me about resources she uses in her teaching and websites that explain service dog etiquette properly, and even though I already know most of this information, hearing her passion about it makes me feel less alone. The DJ announces the father-daughter dance, and I hear people shifting in their seats, preparing to watch this traditional moment. My friend leans over and whispers that Brad is walking to the dance floor, but he's not with Evelyn. He's offering his arm to his grandmother instead. The music starts, something slow and sweet that I don't recognize, and my friend describes what she's seeing in quiet detail. Brad is holding his grandmother carefully, supporting her as they move in small circles on the dance floor, and his movements are gentle and protective. She tells me the grandmother is smiling with tears in her eyes and Brad is leaning down to say something in her ear that makes her laugh softly. Other guests are watching with approval, some wiping their own eyes, and the whole room seems to understand the significance of this choice. When the song ends, the applause is immediate and enthusiastic, louder than normal for a father-daughter dance, and I join in, clapping hard. The sound fills the reception hall and I can feel the support radiating from everyone. This collective approval of Brad choosing to honor someone who deserves recognition instead of someone who assaulted his friend. The applause goes on for what feels like a full minute, and I hear people cheering and whistling their support. The DJ transitions into open dancing and upbeat music fills the space, the bass thumping through the floor under my feet. Several people approach our table over the next hour, asking if I'd like to dance, and their voices sound genuine rather than pitying. I decline most of them because I'm still emotionally worn out from everything that happened, but I appreciate being asked like a normal guest instead of being treated like fragile glass. One guy sits down next to me and introduces himself as Brad's friend from college, and he starts telling me about his sister who has a mobility service dog for her wheelchair. We swap stories about the ridiculous questions people ask, like whether service dogs ever get days off, or if they understand English versus commands. He tells me about someone who tried to feed his sister's dog at a restaurant, and we both laugh at the absurdity of people thinking they can just interact with working animals. The conversation is easy and comfortable, exactly what I need after being treated like a liar and a fraud. He asks smart questions about Maple's training and seems genuinely interested in learning, rather than testing me, and talking to him helps me feel normal again. A man with a deep voice approaches the table and introduces himself as the bride's father, his tone warm but a little rough around the edges. He sits down heavily in a chair and tells me straight out that he's ashamed he didn't step in sooner when he saw what Evelyn was doing to me. He explains he kept thinking someone closer to the situation would handle it, waiting for Brad or the wedding coordinator to notice and intervene. He calls it the bystander effect and says he's sorry for his inaction, that he should have spoken up the first time Evelyn made a comment about Maple. I tell him I understand how shock can freeze people in place, and his apology sounds genuine enough that I accept it. Part of me still wishes more people had said something before it got to the point of physical assault, but I also know that confrontation is hard, and people often don't know what to do. He pats my hand awkwardly and tells me I'm welcome at any family event from now on, that I'm part of their extended family whether I like it or not. As the evening continues, I notice more people going out of their way to be kind to me in small ways. Someone brings me a fresh drink without being asked and describes the dessert table in detail, so I can choose what sounds good. Another person offers to walk with me to the bathroom and guide me around the dance floor traffic. My friend whispers that the wedding coordinator has been quietly managing things, telling people to give me space but also make sure I feel included in the celebration. It's thoughtful work that I wouldn't have known about if my friend hadn't mentioned it. This behind-the-scenes effort to help me feel less like a victim everyone's avoiding, and more like a regular guest having a good time. The balance feels right. Not too much attention, but not isolation either. Brad's brother approaches during a quieter moment when the music has shifted to something slower, and he sits down across from me. He tells me he works at a veterans center and has become friends with several people who have service dogs for various disabilities. He recognized immediately what Evelyn was doing and how wrong it was, but he froze at the microphone, unsure how to handle the situation while giving his speech. He apologizes for not stopping sooner to intervene, and I can hear the regret in his voice. We talk about how ableism often goes unchallenged because people don't know the right way to respond. They're afraid of making things worse or overstepping. He shares some resources about disability rights that his workplace uses for training, and while I'm already familiar with most of them, I appreciate the gesture. The conversation helps me understand that people's hesitation wasn't always about not caring. Sometimes it was about not knowing how to help effectively. The DJ announces the cake cutting, and I hear movement as Brad and his bride make their way to wherever the cake is set up. My friend describes the scene, the multi-tiered cake with flowers, and the traditional cutting with both their hands on the knife. After they cut the first slice and do the feeding each other bit that makes everyone cheer, Brad comes directly to our table carrying a plate. He sets it down in front of me and tells me he wanted to make sure I got a piece before serving other guests. This small gesture that shows he's still thinking about me after everything. The bride joins him, and they both sit down at our table while we eat cake together, the three of us talking about their honeymoon plans to somewhere tropical. They deliberately focus on happy future things, rather than what happened earlier, and their effort to include me in their joy helps push away some of the ugliness. I find myself genuinely laughing at Brad's story about their attempt at dance lessons, how they kept stepping on each other's feet, and the instructor had to keep restarting the music. The normalcy of the conversation, just friends talking about life, helps me feel less like the incident defined the whole evening. Brad's grandmother makes her way back to our table as the reception starts winding down, and she presses something small and rectangular into my hand that feels like a business card. She tells me it's her contact information, and she'd love to stay in touch, that she's always wanted to learn more about service dogs and disability rights. She thinks I could teach her a lot, and the way she says it sounds like genuine interest rather than pity or obligation. She hugs me carefully, her arms thin but strong, and whispers close to my ear that she's proud of how I handled myself tonight. She says my dignity in the face of Evelyn's cruelty showed more grace than her daughter-in-law has ever had, and I feel tears prick behind my sunglasses. My friend leans over and tells me quietly that several guests have been asking her about service dog organizations and disability rights resources throughout the evening. Apparently, witnessing what happened motivated some people to want to educate themselves better about these issues. She's been collecting their contact information so she can send them proper resources later, turning the ugly incident into an opportunity for education. It doesn't erase what Evelyn did or how it made me feel, but knowing that some people were moved to learn and do better provides this small sense that something positive might emerge from the experience. The DJ announces the last dance of the evening, and I hear Brad's footsteps approaching our table with purpose. He asks if I'd like to dance with him and his bride together, the three of us as friends celebrating their marriage. We stand up and Maple guides me onto the dance floor, her movements confident as she navigates around other couples. Brad and his bride position themselves on either side of me, creating this protective little circle, and we sway together to the slow music. They take turns describing what's happening around us, the other dancers moving past, the decorations catching the light, the way the whole room looks in this moment. It feels like we're reclaiming the space where Evelyn attacked me just hours ago, replacing that awful memory with one of friendship and acceptance. I'm grateful for their thoughtfulness in offering this moment, this deliberate choice to end the evening on our terms, rather than letting Evelyn's actions be the final note. The song ends and people start clapping around us, and I can hear chairs scraping as guests begin gathering their things to leave. My friend takes my arm gently, and Maple moves into position beside me, ready to guide us back to our table where my purse is waiting. As we walk across the reception hall, people keep stopping us, their voices warm and genuine as they say goodbye. An older woman touches my shoulder lightly and tells me it was lovely meeting me, that she hopes to see me at future family gatherings. A man introduces himself as someone's uncle and says he enjoyed talking with me earlier, even though I don't remember meeting him specifically in all the chaos. The goodbyes feel normal, like I'm just another wedding guest heading home after a long celebration, instead of the person who got attacked by the groom's mother. One elderly couple stops us near the door, and the wife tells me they have a grandson who's blind, that they're going to tell him about meeting me tonight. Her husband adds that their grandson is about my age and would probably love to connect with someone who understands the service dog experience. I give them my contact information even though it feels slightly awkward, this assumption that all blind people should know each other, but their kindness seems genuine, so I don't mind. More guests file past, waving or saying brief goodbyes, and the normalcy of it all helps me feel less defined by what Evelyn did. I'm not the victim everyone pities. I'm just someone who came to celebrate Brad's wedding, and now I'm going home like everyone else. The wedding coordinator appears beside us as we're collecting our things from the table, her heels clicking in that efficient way that tells me she's been managing events like this for years. She asks quietly if I need anything else before we leave, her voice professional but genuinely concerned. She presses something small into my hand that feels like a business card and explains it has her direct contact information in case I want to file any kind of formal complaint about what happened tonight. She tells me the venue takes accessibility and guest safety very seriously, that even though Evelyn wasn't venue staff, they want to document the incident properly. I thank her and say, I don't think a formal complaint is necessary since Evelyn was already removed and banned from the property. The coordinator nods and I hear her shift her weight, probably understanding my decision but wanting to make sure I know my options. She says the offer stands if I change my mind later, that she'll keep her own notes about the incident in the venue's records. Her thoroughness feels reassuring, like she's taking what happened seriously, even if I'm not pursuing official action. Brad and his bride find us as we're heading toward the exit, their footsteps hurrying to catch up before we leave. Brad's voice is thick with emotion when he apologizes again, telling us how grateful he is that I stayed despite everything his mother did. His bride takes my hand and squeezes it, her grip warm and firm, and she thanks me for not letting Evelyn drive me away from their celebration. Brad tells me he's planning to have a serious conversation with his mother about disability awareness and respect, though his voice carries doubt about whether she'll actually listen or change. He says he knows Evelyn well enough to recognize that she thinks she was right, that she'll probably never genuinely apologize for what she did. His bride adds that regardless of whether Evelyn ever apologizes or learns anything, I'm part of their family now and will be included in all their future celebrations. She lists off upcoming events, their first anniversary party, holiday gatherings, future kids' birthdays if they have children, and hearing her plan me into their future makes my eyes sting with tears behind my sunglasses. Brad hugs me carefully and tells me to text when I get home safe, and his bride hugs me too, her dress rustling against my clothes. They walk us all the way out to the parking lot, waiting while my friend unlocks her car and helps me get settled in the passenger seat with Maple in the back. I hear them wave as we pull away, their voices calling out final goodbyes that fade as we drive toward the parking lot exit. My friend drives in silence for a few minutes, giving me space to process, and I sit there feeling the weight of everything that happened tonight, finally settling over me. The fear I pushed down during Evelyn's harassment, the humiliation of being called a liar in front of all those people, the anger at being physically assaulted. It all comes rushing up at once, and I find myself crying for the first time all evening. The tears come hard and fast, my whole body shaking with sobs that I couldn't let out at the reception. My friend pulls the car over onto the shoulder and puts it in the park, not saying anything, just letting me cry without trying to fix it or tell me it's okay. Maple climbs from the back seat into the front, somehow sensing my distress even though I'm facing forward, and she presses her head against my arm. I bury my face in my hands and cry until my throat hurts, and my sunglasses are wet against my cheeks. My friend reaches over and rubs my back in slow circles, still not speaking, just being present while I fall apart in the safety of her car. We sit there on the side of the road for what feels like forever, but is probably only 10 or 15 minutes, and gradually the sobs slow down and I can breathe normally again. My friend asks softly if I want to stop somewhere for food, knowing that sometimes the best way to process hard things is over French fries and milkshakes at midnight. I nod and wipe my face, grateful for her understanding that I need to talk this through before going home to an empty apartment. She pulls back onto the road and drives to an all-night diner we both know, the kind of place with vinyl booths and fluorescent lights that's always open for people who need somewhere to go. Inside the diner, the smell of coffee and grease fills my nose, and I hear the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. My friend guides me to a booth in the back corner where it's quieter, and Maple settles under the table at my feet. We order comfort food without looking at menus, burgers and fries and chocolate shakes, the kind of meal that feels like a hug from the inside. While we wait for the food, my friend starts telling me things I didn't know about tonight, details I couldn't see but she witnessed. She describes how many people looked uncomfortable during Evelyn's harassment but didn't speak up, how they shifted in their seats and looked away like they were hoping someone else would intervene. She tells me about Evelyn's face when Brad revealed our friendship history, how she went completely pale and her mouth dropped open in shock. She tried to backtrack immediately, my friend says, stammering excuses and explanations that nobody wanted to hear. Hearing these details helps me understand the full picture of what happened, fills in the gaps that my blindness created. My friend tells me she's proud of how I handled myself, that my calm dignity made Evelyn's cruelty even more obvious to everyone watching. The food arrives and we eat slowly, talking between bites about every moment of the evening. I ask if she thinks I should have done anything differently, if maybe I provoked Evelyn somehow by not responding to her earlier comments. My friend puts down her burger and tells me firmly that I did nothing wrong, that the burden of Evelyn's hatred isn't mine to carry or prevent. She points out that I tried to ignore the harassment specifically to avoid causing a scene at Brad's wedding, which showed incredible consideration for his special day. She reminds me that Evelyn was the one who kept pushing and pushing until she crossed into physical assault, that I was just existing as a blind person with a service dog, and that shouldn't require any special behavior to avoid abuse. Hearing this validation helps quiet the self-doubt that's been growing in my mind, the wondering if I somehow deserved the treatment or could have prevented it. We talk about how Evelyn's actions say everything about her and nothing about me, how her ableism is her problem to fix, not mine to accommodate. My friend suggests gently that I might want to talk to someone professional about what happened tonight, not because there's anything wrong with me, but because being publicly humiliated and physically assaulted is hard to process alone. I agree that it might help to discuss this with my therapist, the woman I've been seeing on and off since the car accident that took my sight years ago. We talk about how ableism is so tiring in its constant presence, how tonight was just one big dramatic example of the daily small moments of suspicion and doubt that blind people face everywhere. People assuming I'm faking, questioning whether I really need Maple, treating my disability like a trick or a con instead of just my reality. My friend says she sees it happen to me all the time. These little moments where strangers doubt me or treat me like I'm less capable than I am. Naming that exhaustion feels important somehow, like acknowledging the weight I carry every single day just moving through a world that wasn't built for people like me. We finish eating and sit for a while longer, neither of us wanting to end this processing time. And finally, my friend pays the check, and we head back to the car. The drive to my apartment is quiet, both of us talked out and tired from the long emotional evening. My friend walks me inside with Maple, making sure I'm safely in my apartment before she leaves. She hugs me at the door and tells me to call if I need anything, and I promise I will, even though we both know I probably won't. The apartment feels especially quiet after all the noise of the reception, the silence pressing in around me in a way that's both comforting and lonely. I sit down on my couch and let the full weight of the evening settle over me, not trying to push away the feelings or distract myself. Maple settles at my feet with a heavy sigh that tells me she's exhausted too, worn out from staying alert and working through all that tension and chaos. I realize she must be as tired as I am, maybe more since she had to stay focused and professional while being harassed and grabbed. I get up and give her extra treats from the kitchen, praising her for being such a good girl through everything, and she wags her tail slowly like she knows she earned them. My phone buzzes in my purse and I pull it out, using the voice feature to check who's texting. I compose a message to Brad thanking him again for standing up for me, for choosing me over his mother at his own wedding. His response comes back almost immediately, even though it's past 1 a.m. and he should be celebrating with his bride. He tells me that defending me wasn't even a choice. It was just what you do for people you love, that seeing his mother assault me made him so angry he couldn't think straight. He says he's sorry it took him so long to realize what was happening, that he should have noticed earlier when she was circling our table and making comments. He promises he'll do better at noticing and intervening sooner in the future, that he won't let anyone treat me like that again. His message ends with a reminder that I'm family to him and always will be, regardless of what his mother thinks or does, and I save the text to reread later when I need the comfort of his words. Before bed, I spend time with Maple, brushing her coat and running my hands over her body to check for any injuries from when Evelyn grabbed her harness. She seems physically fine, just tired from the long working day, and she leans into my touch as I groom her. I think about how Maple has been my constant companion through so much, how she gives me freedom and safety and independence, and asks for so little in return. Evelyn's attempt to yank her away from me feels even worse now in the quiet of my apartment, this violation of the bond between us that's hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it. The connection between a person and their service dog is deeper than pet ownership. It's a working partnership built on trust and training and mutual dependence. Evelyn's casual cruelty toward that bond, treating Maple like a prop instead of my lifeline, showed how little she understood about disability and what accommodation actually means. I give Maple one final pat and tell her she's the best dog in the world, and she wags her tail and follows me to the bedroom, ready to sleep after this long, difficult night. I climb into bed and pull the covers up, feeling the familiar softness of my sheets against my skin, and Maple settles onto her bed on the floor beside me with a soft thump and a long exhale that tells me she's as exhausted as I am. My phone sits on the nightstand and I reach over to set an alarm for tomorrow, my fingers finding the buttons through muscle memory and years of practice navigating a world designed for sight. The events of tonight keep replaying in my head like a movie I can't turn off. Evelyn's voice cutting through the ceremony, her perfume overwhelming my senses, the feeling of her fingers grabbing my sunglasses, the panic when she yanked on Maple's harness. But then I think about Brad's voice booming across that reception hall, the way he didn't hesitate for even a second before defending me, how his bride stood beside him without question, the grandmother who asked genuine questions about Maple instead of accusations, the cousin who called out the harassment, the coordinator who handled everything with such professionalism, all those guests who came over to apologize, to offer support, to ask for resources so they could learn and do better. Brad's text message sitting in my phone promising I'm family no matter what his mother thinks or does, the way the whole room erupted in applause after the best man's speech about loyalty and standing up for people. I'm still shaking a little, still processing the fear and humiliation, and I know this incident will stick with me for a long time, probably show up in therapy sessions and random moments when I least expect it. But something else is settling into my chest alongside all that hurt, something warm and solid that feels like validation in a way I don't always get when dealing with ableism. People believed me tonight, not just Brad but his whole family and the other guests. They saw what Evelyn did and called it wrong without question or hesitation. They didn't make excuses for her behavior or suggest I was being too sensitive or tell me to just ignore it. They saw an assault happen and responded like it mattered, like I mattered, like my dignity and safety were worth protecting even if it meant ruining the perfect wedding atmosphere. That's not something I can take for granted because too often when disabled people face discrimination or harassment, bystanders look away or stay silent or suggest we're overreacting. Tonight, people stepped up, spoke out, took action, made it clear that what happened wasn't acceptable. I reach down and touch Maple's soft fur where she's sleeping beside my bed and feel grateful for her steady presence through everything. Tomorrow, I'll probably wake up tired and emotionally drained, maybe cry some more in the shower when nobody can see. But right now, lying here in the dark with my faithful dog beside me, and messages of support on my phone. I feel surrounded by people who proved they see me as fully human and deserving of respect, and that matters more than I can put into words.